One.
Welcome back to season 3, episode 1 of Mr. Restaurant. Today, we're digging into the restaurant business with the legendary Michael McCarty. Michael, thank you for being here. You know, it all started in 1979 when you played a major role putting in what has become known as California cuisine on the map. I'd like to talk to you about that. I'd like to talk about your life. I'd like to talk to you about where you're going. So here we are. Welcome to my party because I know you've thrown a few yourself.
You got it. Great to be here.
Thank you very, very much. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. Where were you born?
I was born in New York, a little town called Mount Kisco. We lived in Briarcliff Manor on the Hudson.
And how many were in your family?
I had three brothers, so there were four boys and a mom and dad. And
I was one of three boys.
yeah,
I was the middle kid.
yeah, I was the number two. But we had a great family.
So was there a big age disparity when you were growing up?
No, no, no. We were all very, very classic 50s. We were all 2 years apart.
Had your parents been assimilated in America, or had they come over from Ireland?
Oh, no, no. It was great grandparents' time. They came over from Ireland and England. My father's family settled in Michigan, my mother's in Indiana. Uh, and uh, they were great people.
So nothing to discuss there of any kind of nefarious,
No,
nature. Not that
well,
I'm
yeah,
Barbara
of
Walters.
course.
God rest his soul.
When an Irish guy marries an English woman, a Catholic marries a Protestant, there was, of course, an uproar in the United States and back in Ireland. But once I got to know my mother, they all threw in the towel and had a blast for 40 years.
Was your mother a cook?
My mother and father entertained.
Ah,
One of the main reasons I'm in this business is because they had a fantastic group of friends in Briarcliff. They were a close knit group of about 12, 15 families. And they always were getting together to entertain. The food thing was extremely important for them, but it was not like the intellectual, insanity that people talk about now. It was more of the idea, which is how I decided the restaurant business it was like throwing a party every night and giving everybody a bill, and everybody had a big time. And that's what they did, whether they were barbecuing outside, they were very seasonal. We had a little beach shack in Rhode Island. So all the summer we would be there, and being introduced to all of that seafood and fantastic stuff there. It was a very big Portuguese environment there. So we learned an awful lot, both in the farming department and in the fish department. But really, that was it. They were great. I mean, they were a fantastic mom and dad. My dad commuted for 30 years to Manhattan, worked for General Electric. My mother was your classic 50s mother, very involved in her four boys and many other things, of course.
did she
But
follow cookbooks like Betty Crocker or anything?
yes, she was a very good cook. The New York Times cookbook was a big hit. Uh, Years later, I bought them. I introduced them to Julia Child, and I got them the Julia Child cookbooks. But she
Wait, wait,
really,
wait, 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 wait a second.
yeah,
I introduced my parents to Julia Child. So
right,
how do you go from this little town in New York?
right,
Well, I want to introduce my mom and dad to Julia Child, my
yeah.
dear friend.
Well, it's been
How's that happen?
been a crazy, it's been a crazy 70 years, almost, not quite
You're
yet,
not
but
70.
next month,
Mazel tov, as we would say.
yeah.
My
But
tribe.
the thing is that as I said, they really were always focused on having a great party, great people, great environment, indoors, outdoors, spring, summer, fall, winter, uh, just an appropriate attention to detail, but without any kind of fuss.
It's
And
just
their friends were
no
that way.
fuss. No fuss,
Had
right?
no fuss.
And that's
And
very
and
emblematic of your restaurant.
Yeah, well, and you see, I went away to France as a junior in high school, and
Prompted that.
that was it's a program called Andover and Exeter School Year Abroad, and we had a program in Rennes, France, and Brittany, and in Barcelona in Spain. And you went as a junior in high school, not college, high school. You lived with a family for the year. You were completely immersed. And the night before I went, in those days we traveled by boat. We went into Manhattan to New York City, and my parents took me to a restaurant called Laurent. And in those days, as you well remember, the classic good restaurants in any major city in America, or in the world for that matter, were based on Escoffier. They were classical French restaurants, the
Yes.
Maxime's look. And that night I went in there. The next day I was getting on the boat to France, but I was just mesmerized and blown away by the electricity of this dining room. I'd never been in a real restaurant like that before. There weren't any where we lived. And when the owner came in, the electricity ratcheted up. Everybody looked great. It was September, they were all back from the summer. And then I remember my father and his friend arguing over the bill, and it sort of like came right together like that. It's like, as they said, this is the same feeling I see when my parents are entertaining. Everybody's got this kind of vibe, this electricity. However, you get them to pay at the end. That was what inspired me to get into the restaurant business right there.
Had you ever had any inkling to go anywhere else, or were you just simply like at 15 years old? Is this about the time you were there, 15 in France?
Yeah, and not really, and it kept getting better.
Want to be a baseball player or something like that?
No, not at all. I mean, I had no idea what a restaurant was. As I said, they didn't exist where we lived. And that was just such a mesmerizing experience, an epiphany in a funny way. And it either got better because the next day I got on this student boat with 1,500 students. 50 of them were us, the young juniors in high school. The other 1,450 were juniors in college, all going abroad. But the good news is it took 11 days. Even the better news, it was run by an Italian company. So the meal periods were sensational. I learned about in 11 days more about how the Italians live from all these fantastic waiters and servers and everybody that was involved in their rituals. And, so I sort of got that really intensely ingrained in me. And then when I landed in France, I happened to live in a family that was very similar to that. They lived in Brittany. Brittany, as you may know, is a folklore. It's Breton. They have a very classic culture. They're surrounded by the sea, so the seafood is absolutely impeccable. It's a very big growing province, so that the food was always fantastic. And I happened to have a family that really was large and always entertained. And so literally within a 16, 17, 18-month period, I learned everything I needed to know, including, which was the top off that, which we didn't have in the United States of America, we had appropriate cooking schools for students that wanted to pursue this as a career. Remember in America, you may remember in junior high school, it was like home ec.
Right, but there's no CIA at that time.
No, the CIA was in the 60s, was the 50s, was a vet program. I mean, it was, you come back from the wars, you go to work here. You learn how to do this. It was just beginning to find itself. And within the 70s is when it started to happen. Julia Child really had a lot to do with that. And a couple of people that had been to France, in the 60s, started to get it going here. But when I came, and so that's what I did.
If you said CIA, it was, the CIA. It was.
Oh yeah, I mean, and they
Culinary Institute of America.
Yeah, and they really got going. They got on the bandwagon for the modern American stuff in the 80s, like everybody did in the United States, as everybody did in the world, by the way. The 80s was an extremely important time, not to jump forward, but at any rate, So from
Forward
my
back.
family, I learned about the École Hôtelière, which is the French school that you would go to as a student. Like there, after ninth grade, you make a decision. You're going to go for a baccalaureate for the university program like we do in America, or you can go into any number of trade schools. It's very formal there, and they're early organized. So I went back to Paris. I went to Paris. I enrolled at the École Hôtelière and the Cordon Bleu and the Académie du Vin, which was run by Stephen Spurrier. And
Were you fluent in French at that time?
Yes. Well, you see, the beauty of having gone to Brittany was I spoke fluent French. It was an immersive school, and it was very intense. And so I was able to like jump right in Paris. It was like very unique. So I spent the better half of the first half of the 70s there.
And you're how old at that time?
Well, then let's see, flash forward. I would have been 20 in 73. So I started when I was like 19, 20, 21, 22, 20, 21, 22, 23.
Wanting to be a chef.
Well, I knew very, very early on that I needed to be a chef.
As a background.
The horror stories of restaurants where the chef walks out on a Saturday night. So whereas I was very intrigued with being a chef, the beautiful thing about the École Hôtelière was they offered the three parts. They offered the chef, the front of the house, and the back office. So you were trained in all three departments. And then when you're halfway through the program, you make a decision which one you want to go to. You want to go on and become a chef? You want to go on and become a front of the house guy? Or do you want to just stick and be in the business side? And so I was fortunate to understand that at a very early age. And I realized that if I wanted to be in the restaurant business, I had to know everything. And so, yes, the chef was the most glamorous part of it. And it certainly was the majority of what I did there. And I worked in one restaurant for one night, and I said, this is ridiculous. Because as you know, they put you over there and you peel potatoes for 2 months. And, I said, I can go out to all these restaurants and learn more just having dinner there about what's good and bad and ugly about them than that. So that's what I did that entire time I was in Paris, as well as cooking. I started a little bistro, and that's where I began to formulate my version of new American food.
You started a little bistro in Paris. That was your
yes, on Ile Saint-Louis. It was a little tiny 22-seater.
How'd you make money on a 22-seat restaurant?
Well, it didn't matter. I didn't pay any rent. My friend
going under.
Yeah, no, my friend owned the building. That nobody cared about rent in those days. Nobody cared about anything. It was basically entirely illegal. And I ran it only at night. I would come back and cook, and I had a barman and a dishwasher, and that's it. I mean, literally, when I say it's tiny, it's tiny. It was at 20
Actually
seats.
Sounds very cool to me to go to.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
Was there?
It was on Ile Saint-Louis, and Ile Saint-Louis was a very interesting little island. Then it was actually a little village.
Ile Saint-Louis,
a little village. Now it's completely overtaken by art galleries and real estate things. But in those days, I had 3 fish markets, I had 3 boulangeries, I had 3 meat guys, and they would have everything ready. So when I came back, I would just pick it up and cook it.
Very romantic image of Paris.
Yes, it was great.
And the cuisine then, did you focus on everything French, or did you go into Brittany's food, or what did you go into?
Well, basically what I did was I sort of really took from the way my parents cooked. My father was a barbecue guy, and my mother, they were very simple. They cooked really great stuff, and
very tasty.
And so I was going with this. That's the way I was brought up. I'm learning Escoffier food at the École Hôtelière and at the Cordon Bleu. But surprisingly, right at that time, in the first half of the 70s, was when Gaud and Millau and the French Nouvelle Cuisine revolution occurred. I was very fortunate to be there. The late 60s, the Paul Bocuse, the Frères Trois Gros, La Pyramide, they were all beginning this idea of what is Nouvelle Cuisine. And Gaud and Millau had just opened, and they were duking it out with the Michelin guide. And so they were saying, nope, you know what, you keep your Escoffier. We're going to take it to another place. And of course, like any revolution, sometimes they go too far, which Nouvelle Cuisine did, but it dialed itself back.
Why did it go too far?
Well, in other words, it became almost a cliche, where you got the big Villa Bush white plates that are like 14 inches in diameter, and you got one scallop in the middle with the sauce and the this and the that. Now,
Like $2,000 on your ticket.
yeah. But what happened really was you brought up a very important word. You said Brittany. What I realized that as I grew up in New York, I went to school in Pennsylvania, I went to school in Illinois, hadn't been to California yet, but in New York, I could see let's use the term terroir of being in Rhode Island at the beach and understanding that this is where my mother would buy the vegetables, and she was the wife of the vegetable lady was the wife of the fisherman, and so we would buy the fish from him and they had a great butcher in Watch Hill, and so you rather than going to the supermarket, it was sort of like a regional thing, and Brittany was again a very important part of me because they were very proud of their food. They not only had the Breton food, the galettes and everything and this and that, but the seafood and the produce that was grown there. I was very fortunate that the family I lived in were old, ancient royalty that lost all their money, but they held on to their 900-year-old chateau that hadn't had any repairs and maintenance for 900 years. To give you an example, all the bedrooms, the beds were on wheels because when it rained, it leaked. You had to move your bed here or move it over there, etc.
Good idea.
But they had wonderful sharecroppers. One would grow the pigs, one would grow the beef, one would grow the vegetables, and they were close enough to all three sides of the ocean to get the Baylon oysters and the moule and the Dover sole and the turbo. Everything grew right there. It was fantastic. So regional food became a big part of me. And remember, in Paris, I was there when Les Halles was still there. So you go to Les Halles, and as I said before, on Ile Saint-Louis, I was very fortunate that it still was a quaint little one-street neighborhood with all of these food markets on it, run by these families. So the education was, the cheese, everything, the fish, everything was fantastic.
And I can smell it and feel it and taste it
right
now. You're really giving me the hunger pang for Paris. And
it's really out of the movies. It really was amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better time to be there with that Nouvelle Cuisine revolution going on and realizing that you didn't have to just cook Escoffier food. Because if the goal in those days, whether you were in Berlin or Paris or London or Rome or New York or Chicago, was to duplicate the beef Wellington. You see what I'm saying? To duplicate the lobster Thermidor. The beauty of Escoffier food is he codified it and he created what I call the Latin of French cooking, but it's the Latin of true cooking. And this is before you get, of course, into the ethnic foods, but any chef that could master Escoffier food had the Latin to go on and create whatever they wanted and know what worked and what didn't.
And that gave you the confidence then to eventually move to California and start your own.
Well, yes, that was it.
We're going to talk about Dr. D is giving me the high sign. I think we're going to go to commercial Dr. D in a minute or so. Is that right? Okay, 1 minute, I guess. So, but continue because I want to get into your migration into California, and
that's it. You see, and then out of the blue, my parents moved to Malibu, California.
Ah, that's what brought you out here.
So when I came home from France, I went to see my brother in Boulder, Colorado. He was at school there. On my way out, I went to the summer program that Cornell has. It's a 90-day program. Very, very. It's basically, if you want to, mostly they're all Europeans at the time, or not Europeans, but foreigners who want to work in America.
At that school at Cornell.
That's the Cornell Hospitality School. They have a great program. You take one class a week. You take it, 8 hours a day, one class a week. And it Americanizes you from how do you butcher differently in America to business and tax law. And it was a great re-entry. And then I went out to see my brother on the way to California. And I ended up getting shanghaied into teaching a class of French cooking in French. We can go into that later.
Wait, in Boulder or in California?
In Boulder.
In Boulder, before you hit California.
Before I hit, on my way.
Now you're like, what, 20, 22?
I got waylaid. I'm 21.
21.
74, late
But you had
74.
immersed yourself for years in this French cuisine and culinary world. So you were very ahead of the curve for certainly your generation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was very fortunate.
Generation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to break. And now we're from Boulder. We're going to move into Malibu and get into that whole scene and discuss Michael McCarty's life and times. And I'm Mr. Restaurant, just really enthralled with the real Mr. Restaurant. Right back. Thanks, Michael.
Good.
All right. Hold on one second. I want to clear my nose.
There you go.
I think I have a little Kleenex here. Yeah. Okay. We got a few stories we can share with each other off camera. You know, I'm looking forward to coming in one night and just hanging out.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob Morris is a piece of work.
Well, he's a great piece of work, and he's a loyal guy. If he likes you, he loves you. If he doesn't like you, he doesn't like you at all. So I'm glad I'm on his good side.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful, wonderful human being, and he's been great to me. So
he knows my funny story about the Paradise Cove restaurant is I came back for 3 weeks one summer after they'd moved out here.
Yeah.
And we're walking on the beach, and my dad said, "Hey, look at that." And a sign said, "Opening in 2 weeks." So I said, he said, "Go in there and see if you can help him." So I did.
That's how you met Bob Morris.
Well, no, that's how I met Jimmy McDonald, who owned it at the time.
I see. When it was the Jetty, or
no.
His
Jimmy
dad had
McDonald,
owned the Jetty.
It was called the Paradise Cove then in the beginning.
Paradise Cove. Got it. Okay. Ready to go? All right.
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
Well, we're back at it with Michael McCarty, and I'm Will Knox, and this is Mr. Restaurant. So here we are, Michael. We were in Boulder, moving west. You left Boulder. You were teaching briefly in Boulder, and you moved to Malibu, or the Boo, as it's called by many, because your parents moved there.
Exactly.
And you're 21 years old, and now what am I going to do with my life? I'm 21.
Right. Well,
other than smoking pot, what were you doing?
Yeah. So what I did was the way that I paid for a lot of my schooling and things like that and lifestyle was I catered while I was in Paris, because the American expats love to have somebody who could speak French and English and round them up and get them going. It was still, again, a difficult time for a lot of people. But when I was in Boulder, the final exam of my last class, one of my students brought a girl who is now my wife 50 years ago.
Oh my gosh. That's a real testament to you and your wife and your life.
Yeah.
And her name.
At any rate, so I said to her in December, I said, what are you doing? And she says, "I'm going to LA to see my parents." I said, "I'm going to LA to see my parents." So we moved here, and that week between Christmas and New Year's, we went out to the 5 or 6 best restaurants in LA. Perino's, Scandia.
You had that much money in your pocket?
Oh, I was a big caterer. Let me tell you, I did some big parties.
For you.
L'Hermitage, Ma Maison, Le Restaurant, Saint Germain. Those are about it. And that was one of the things on the checklist. She could eat and understand because she grew up in Switzerland. She's American, but she grew up in Switzerland.
So she spoke French fluently.
She spoke French
and German.
And she knew how to eat in French restaurants. So, it was great. And we've been together ever since.
Been together ever since. And her name is?
Kim.
Can we refer to Kim as being very instrumental in your life at the restaurant?
100%.
And what did she do?
She's an artist.
So she's an artist.
Yes.
And that contributed greatly to your whole overall concept of what Mike
absolutely
be?
100%. When on the little place on Ile Saint Louis, there were local artists that still could afford to live on the island, and I did one of the things that people hear about, I did trade for art on the walls. So I got all these crazy artists. They put the work up there. And when I came out here, little did I know, but I learned very rapidly that Santa Monica, Venice, and LA was a very big, burgeoning, emerging artist community here. Huge. You know, Richard Diepenkorn, Bill Bryce, Larry Bell, Hockney. I mean, it was insane. Billy Al Bankston, Laddie John Dill, Chaz
West Side
Garabedian,
Venice types.
all the West Side Venice and Santa Monica types. And Kim came out here and went to Art Center College of Design, and then got her MFA at UCLA in the fine arts. But you know, our restaurants have always been about, you know, we did the gallery look, you know, rather than the red patent leather and the, you know, closed red velvet curtains and all that stuff. All of the Escoffier style restaurants, we did open air, outdoor gardens, all white, lots of artwork. We showed tons of artwork, and Kim really coordinated the entire thing. And
but what got that into your brain to kind of say, all right, we've gone to the 6 restaurants in LA. Now, Kimmy, did you ever call her Kimmy?
no,
I'll call her Kimmy.
but
Kimmy,
a lot of people do.
Kim, I want to open a restaurant. Did you say that to her?
Oh yeah. She always knew. I mean, I always knew we were going to open a restaurant here.
Okay.
You know, I called up Lois Dwan, who was the food critic for the LA Times.
LA Times.
And I called her out of the blue, cold caller. I said, Lois, I'm Michael. This is my history. I just came from France. This is what I've been doing. I'm brand new in LA. I know absolutely nothing about it. Who is the most knowledgeable chef? And who is the most knowledgeable wine person? And she said, well, Jean Bertrand at L'Ermitage and Dennis Overstreet at the Wine Merchant. Hold on one second.
We'll be right back with Michael McCarty. He just stepped out of the room for a second to show me something that's
power.
It's tech related, and it has to do with power, because I think he's powering back up because he powered down. And in the business of media that I'm in, I guess I'm vamping until ready. While
there we go. We're ready.
Here he is. He's back in. Okay.
Power.
Welcome back, Michael McCarty.
Jesus.
All right. So we're talking about Lois Dwan and
so
Dennis
Lois says to
Overstreet,
me, so I immediately go over
best
to Jean
wine and
Bertrand
best chef.
and I introduce myself to him. We hit it off perfectly.
You're not a shy guy, are you?
No. And we had a blast, and he had a beautiful restaurant. It was stunning. And he was the only chef really at the time that was embracing Nouvelle Cuisine, but not the stupid part of Nouvelle Cuisine.
This is L'Ermitage.
This is L'Ermitage restaurant, not
on
the
La
hotel.
Cienega? Was it on La Cienega, if I recall?
Yes, on La Cienega.
Right.
Dennis was a whiz in the wine department because he was in Beverly Hills at the Wine Merchant, and he was the most knowledgeable. And because he happened to have an extremely energetic crowd who loved to buy wine. This is the beginning. You know, it was like the lawyers and the doctors and Hollywood really were into wine, and they were learning how to learn about it.
And you were going to
teach. I hatched a class at Dennis's of teaching food and wine pairing, and we had an absolute blast down in the basement. Talk about the grotto, and so all of these people would show up. Some of them are still my clients today, and they would we would show them how we would actually cook, and they'd participate. Little hot plates and everything. And then we'd pair each course with wine. Because remember something, in those days, it was white wine with fish and red wine with meat. And that was about it.
Very elementary.
And people knew, it's like when I was at the Académie du Vin in Paris. You basically had 3 classes. You had Bordeaux, Burgundy, and Champagne. And then as years went by, they picked up the Rhone, and they picked up the Jura, and they picked up the Loire Valley, you know, and then this thing called Italian wine showed up, you know, in the mid 80s, and the same thing with Spanish wine, you know, again, being commercially modernized. Um, and so that sort of got me going here. And I realized that in that time, I also met through Jean, his purveyors. And I realized that they had a great meat program here, superior meats. They had a fairly good chicken program. They had a great squab program, but they didn't have any good ducks. So Jean and I partnered and we started a duck farm. It was called
Where
Mad Ducks.
where
Mad Ducks. No, they wouldn't have us in Malibu. They wouldn't have us anywhere but in Acton on the way to Palmdale and Lancaster. They didn't care what we grew up there. So we started a duck farm and we did the Moulard, which is the mule duck, the Muscovy male and the Pekin female. There's a whole story to that. Made foie gras in the beginning.
And this is before you opened Michael?
This is before, yes. And during that same time, working with Dennis Weiss, who was from Northern Produce. That was the Weiss family. They started one of the great produce companies. Finding farmers to grow things that we bring seeds in, and we started this whole process of moving them towards this, like growing haricot vert, for example. They didn't grow that here. Blood oranges, didn't grow them here. The many things, when you wanted herbs in those days, you went to the spice rack in the supermarket.
Listen, you wouldn't call haricot vert anything other than green beans, I guess.
Green beans, and they were 5 times the size. They weren't the little baby greens. But anyway, so it was a very educational couple of years. And then I looked around. I said, it has to be outdoors. I made a decision to be on the far west side because I couldn't stand driving into Beverly Hills and back every other day. So that's how I ended up in Santa Monica.
You were living in Santa Monica?
No. That's how I was living in Malibu. I've always lived in the same place in Malibu.
So okay. So you're still today living in the same place that you settled with Kim?
Yes.
Wow. And your parents, were they far away?
They moved to Denver, Colorado from Malibu.
So is that how you got involved with Chef Jimmy Schmidt in Denver?
That's another story.
Oh my God, we've got stories that are coming out of our ears. Do we have enough time? Dr. D's telling me 1 minute till our next break. And then how much time do we have with Michael?
15, 20 minutes.
15, 20. We can't get Michael McCarty's life into 15, 20 minutes.
We can do it. We can do it.
Oh no, we're not even open yet in Santa Monica. All right, listen. I want to know then you're in Santa Monica with Kim, you're on the west side. Are you then saying to yourself, I want to open a restaurant in Santa Monica? Is that what
we're in Malibu? And we're in Malibu. And I said, the furthest I'm going to drive every day, because the smog and the traffic was horrible here those days.
Looney.
Was in Santa Monica. And it was, Santa Monica was a wasteland. It was like the Third Street Promenade was a disaster. It was like tumbleweeds going down it. But I looked at all over the place, starting at the 405 going west. I went back and forth with about 4 or 5 places that had some sort of outdoor space, but this one was perfect.
Wait a second. So you were intent then on saying, I'm going into the restaurant business.
Oh, yeah.
Chef, restaurateur.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's how your mindset was.
That my mindset was
23 years old.
Yeah. And I was going to build a restaurant that accomplished, a half a dozen important things, the food being the most important, but the service and the way the place looked, the decor, the attitude. Remember, everything was French. There were no Americans really in our business. There were a handful in the United States, like me, that were pioneering in there, like San Francisco, Alice Waters. You had Larry Forgione in New York. Again, you had Jimmy Schmidt in Detroit. You had Larry Forgione. You had Bradley Ogden in Kansas City. You had Paul Prudhomme in New Orleans. You had Jeremiah Tower in San Francisco. You had Mark Miller in San Francisco. And that's it. You could count the regional American chefs on both hands in the late 70s and early 80s that were getting into the program. And it's like, it just exploded in the 80s. And that's when
hold that thought, because we got a break right now. We're going to get right back to the opening of the famous Michael's restaurant, which still exists today, as well as its namesake in New York City, which opened 10 years later. You opened Michael's in 1979?
Here and 1989 there.
In 1989 in New York. We'll be right back to hear more about this with Michael McCarty. I'm Will Knox. This is Mr. Restaurant, and I'm with the real Mr. Restaurant.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Hey,
We're back. All of a sudden, here we are. Okay, Michael, the
Yeah.
timeline's going really rapidly now. It's 1978.
I'm building the restaurant.
But see, where are you getting your money, man?
Okay, so as I said, I
Everybody's got ideas.
catered a lot.
Okay.
And my first customers were all the people that I catered for. So I had a chunk of money, but I went to 9 banks and applied for an SBA loan, and 8 banks turned me down.
You didn't have any collateral. Oh, you had a house, I guess.
I had the 20% that you required.
Got it.
You needed 20%. No, the collateral was the United States government. So the SBA, I went to but 9 of them. But in those days, restaurants were like, "What? Are you kidding?" Plus, I had a 4-foot-long ponytail, which I subsequently cut, so I could, not freak them out. But the last restaurant I went to happened to be on 4th and Wilshire, right here, 2 blocks from my
showing you
restaurant.
the real estate, because I'm a real estate guy. That's what I do for a living. All right.
I see.
All right. I started out originally supporting my acting and producing career.
Right.
Coming into LA from San Francisco. I'm born and raised in San Francisco, 4th gen. And I come down to LA and I get into residential real estate to support my acting and producing in 1976. Then the market just tanks in 1980 and I didn't know what I'm going to do. So I found that maybe if I go into commercial real estate, that works. Well, the first deal I did in commercial real estate, I found for a little known chef that you might know. His name was Wolfgang Puck.
Oh, yeah.
I found the Spago location.
Oh, how great.
So I got into real estate. So I'm concerned particularly about restaurant real estate. And
well, there you go.
That come to you? Who were you working with that was turning you on to this location?
So I went and I finally got Perry Jones was the branch manager at UC, United California Bank, and I presented my package. It was all put together in the forms that you need for the SBA, all done exactly the way it's supposed to be.
Did you have artwork? Did you have renderings, a deck?
Oh, I had the renderings, I had the artwork, I had the menus, I had the finances, I had the whole thing. And at the end of the meeting, I said, okay, here's another one going down the tubes. And he said, so Michael, listen, I've been looking at your menu. I see you have this Pacific swordfish here, and you're doing it with a Pommery mustard and white mushroom cream sauce. I happen to have a piece of swordfish in my house tonight that I was going to cook for my wife. Could you give me that exact recipe? I want to duplicate that.
Oh, you're in now.
I said, I'm in. So I said, yeah, Perry, here we go. And by the way, what are you doing tomorrow night? And I took him out to dinner. I went to all 7 of those restaurants. And he came back and he says, I think we can do this. We walked the property. Literally was 2 blocks from the bank branch over here. We walked the property. He said, I'm going to do this. I think you know what you're doing. I think it's good. Let's see what we do. And of course, he took it downtown to the big headquarters and they denied him. They said, what are you, an idiot? This is a restaurant.
You don't do restaurants.
Forget it. And I said, Perry, you got to go to bat for me. You know this is going to be good. And so they did. And I got the loan. No partners, just me. And in 78, we started building.
Well, wasn't it less expensive to have the bank be your partner than to have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 other partners?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was.
Right?
It was
give more
part
away
of
to those guys.
It was. I think it was part of the. It was one part of the modern approach to the restaurant business, that I felt very good about. It was like you could actually be an entrepreneur. You could do this. And you could have a banking relationship and it was good. And And it turned out fine. And, I tell you, my father was back in town for a meeting in 1979. They'd moved to Colorado. And he was back in town at a meeting, and they were at a dinner party. And there was a guy at the table who was talking, and he's saying, yeah, that great restaurant Michael's that just opened up that you can't get into for 6 months? We financed it. It was the president of UC Bank. And my father goes, whoa, that was hilarious. What a coincidence.
Right.
Yep.
And
yep.
You not only had this environment, but you created an environment with the people
Yes.
who were there and the art and the food itself. So it was a whole package, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I met one of the great restaurateurs in town, although you would have known it at the time. Was he owned the Polo store. He owned the Ralph Lauren store. Jerry Magnan.
Jerry Magnan, yes.
And Jerry and his partner Larry Mindell, they owned about a handful of restaurants. Classic Italian.
He had Chianti on Melrose.
They did Chianti. They owned a bunch, but he also still had his Jerry Magnan store. So I got to know him again through art. He was also an art collector. The world was very small in those days, and so within a very short period of time, you knew the handful of players in the food and the wine and the art business. And Jerry, I said, Jerry, look, the standard uniform in all these restaurants throughout the United States and the world are tuxedos or variations on the tuxedos, depending on your status in the service. I don't want to do tuxedos. He says, oh, I got a guy I want something American. I only want American. So he takes me to the corner of his store and he says, you see that over there? That guy's name is Ralph Lauren. And he's an up-and-coming designer, and you're going to love this stuff. And I'd gone to prep school, so I knew what that was all about, and it was perfect. We got the Ralph Lauren pink shirts, Oxford shirts. We got a rep tie. We got khaki pants, topsiders, and we outfitted my staff in that, and it was just a whole nother look. Again, imagine yourself in the restaurant. It's all outdoors, the lights everywhere. The walls are white. There's art everywhere. And instead of people marching through it with, the tuxedos, they're marching through it with a really nice, casual, chic, Ralph Lauren outfits. And that was another big hit.
You really fostered creativity in your restaurants.
Well, that's it. I was very fortunate to have a great, great team. I mean,
how did you get that first team?
Well, let me tell you, it was like, I would sit in the garden and I'm planning and finishing up construction. And then one by one, these kids would walk in down the stairs and they'd heard about it. Jonathan Waxman, he just walked down the stairs and he says, Michael, heard a lot about you. I want to go to work for you.
So the world was so small with the chefs that they would just put a word got out that this guy's opening up in Santa Monica.
Next thing you know, Mark Peel walks down the steps. Next thing you know, Billy Flug, who was from Boston, who happened to be out here and heard about it from Boston. He came down the steps. Ken Frank came down the steps. And so I said, all right, you guys, and then Jimmy Brinkley, a fantastic pastry chef that nobody knows about, but is brilliant. Pioneered, again, with me, we really took the classic French pastries, modernized them, made them less booze, more about less weight and dense. Again, this is all this stuff going on. And so with that team, we opened up, and it was the same thing. I got a bunch of Americans in the front. My sommelier was the easiest part to find because, first of all, there were no sommeliers. And Phil had worked when I was in Boulder. He ran the wine department in the Liquor Mart, which had just to give you an idea of how important the Liquor Mart was in Boulder, Colorado. That Liquor Mart was owned by a guy who so loved wine, especially California wine and French wine. Of course, that's all there was at the time, really. But he got the same allocation that the entire Southern California, LA area got for his store. That's how successful it was. And so I found Phil and brought him to LA, and he opened up, and so we had this fantastic wine list. I mean, when we opened up, Krug was our champagne by the glass, and Schramsberg was our sparkling by the glass. Dick Graff from Chalon was our Chardonnay. And Tom Jordan, who I knew from Colorado as well, I met there. It was his Cabernet, was the Cabernet by the glass. I mean, it was that kind of a thing.
And you created your own vineyard too, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that was a little bit later. That was in '85.
Got it.
Yeah.
Is that still around?
Oh yeah. That burned down in the '93 fire with our house and everything. But we rebuilt everything, and we got the vineyard back up. In fact, the only thing that loves this cold and rain in LA is my vines. They can't believe how beautiful it is, because they love to be dormant and they love the water. And so we're getting ready now. We're going to start pruning in about a week for the 2023 vintage.
This is Malibu Vineyard.
Malibu, the vineyard, right above Carbon Beach.
Could I buy a bottle?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I am. In fact, we're just bottling the 2016. Bruno Delfonso and Chris Curran make my wine up in Lompoc in the wine ghetto. And in fact, we're going to be, I've been using all of it at the two restaurants, New York and LA, but I happen to have had a big vintage in 2016. So we're going to be back to selling it to the restaurants and wine stores in Malibu itself, like Paradise Cove and
I live in Ojai now, and that's become a real big axis between Santa Barbara, Lompoc. You mentioned Manfred Krankel's got a big vineyard up there.
He's the best. We had the complete selection of Cinquanon. He was one of the greats.
I'd have to mortgage my house for that wine, but nonetheless, Listen, you now are established in Santa Monica. You're all of 25 years old. You've been open for a year. You're hot. Then what are you thinking to yourself?
Well, I'm thinking that I really want to open one in New York. And so,
this is your baby, this is your child. You don't have any children at this time, right?
No. Yeah. So, and it's great. So my wife and I took the last week of August off and the first week of September of '79. We'd only been open for 5 or 6 months. Went to Paris, and I was with Stephen Spurrier and John Winthrop, and that owned the Académie du Vin. And I said, and we just were having dinner, reminiscing. And he said, I'm going to be opening an Académie du Vin in New York City. I said, that's so weird. I was going to open a Michael's in New York City. And he said, well, I happen to have a great broker in New York. So we changed our plans and went into New York, September. I met with the broker. I said, I'll be back in 2 weeks. This is my criteria. Got to be between 52nd and 59th. Got to be between Madison, and you got to be between 6th. Because the one thing I was always frustrated with in the first few months of Santa Monica was we were booked 6 months out in advance for dinner, and you could shoot a cannon off for lunch. We were in an area where there was no lunch business, no matter what you did. So I said, I'd studied New York, and I knew that Midtown was it. It was before Wall Street and downtown was happening, all the other places. But, and so then when I went back, I actually found the location that I'm in right now. I had to wait 10 years to negotiate with Guido. It took me 10 years.
Oh, okay, well, that tells you enough right there.
Yeah. But finally, he threw in the towel.
You're telling me 2 minutes, is that to the end of the show? No, till another break. Okay, I'm getting a little high sign. So Guido and you are becoming familiar with each other, but it took
10
you
years. 10 years.
From the time you saw this site to take it. As a broker, I can tell you, you're a marvelous client to work with because you knew exactly where you wanted to go.
They showed me so many other places, and I said, nope.
It's all crap,
This is New York. This is my place. It has a huge garden. It looks just like the buildings were built the same year, 1933. This is California bungalow year. That is a modern hipster building built by the Rockefellers. I couldn't believe it.
And so who was going to finance that? The bank again?
Well, by then I was, there's a whole nother story. I built 3 other restaurants. I was
You don't have any stories, Michael.
I know.
I need some stories.
I know.
So
Uh,
you got you had the financing. You were very self-assured after
Yeah.
less than a year of opening in Santa Monica that I'm
Yeah.
going to go do New York, although it took 10 years later.
10 years later.
Okay, well,
But in the meantime, uh, I was very involved in the American Institute of Wine and Food. That's where the Julia Child came in. And this is 1979 and 80.
that's how you met Julia Child.
Yes, she was one of the first people in my restaurant. Robert Mondavi, Dick Graff from Chalone, Richard and Tekla Sanford, Heights, Joe, Jordan, of course. And we got together and we founded the American Institute of Wine and Food.
Wasn't
And
Bob Morris involved with that group?
in the beginning, we tried to get anybody who was anybody to become involved because we needed money, obviously. And it was a very important thing. We wanted to get, the mission statement was to make gastronomy part of the art world and art education and not just in home ec. So you could actually get a degree. And we really spent a lot of time and money, and we had these conferences of gastronomy all over the United States. And it was, that's a whole nother story.
Well, we're going to stop on that story because Dr. D's imploring me to. Right?
Okay, very good.
Right, Doc?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got to take another break. Stay tuned to Michael McCarty. I'm Will Knox, and you're listening and watching Mr. Restaurant.
All right, very good. And our last segment.
Okay, so now the next segment is how long?
It's about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Well, how am I going to accomplish 10 minutes of Michael McCarty's life? We're bringing him back. This is going to be a two-parter, Michael. Are you open to another session another day?
Yeah, sure.
Are you open to part 2?
Yeah, part 2.
The sequel?
The sequel.
Okay, because we're gonna get into more of this. You're very instrumental, obviously, in the world.
That's what we're made of nowadays, the sequels.
Okay, so
Or what do they call them? Reboots?
I got a lot of questions I haven't hit. That just keep going, baby. Here we go.
Stand by. Let me get it all measured out, and here we go. Thank you. 3, 2, 1.
We're back now with Michael McCarty, who is probably Mr. Restaurant incarnate, without a doubt.
Oh, God.
I'm Will Knox. Michael, thank you for being here today. We've got about another 10 minutes, but as I asked you at the break, you'd come back for part 2, right?
Right.
Okay, we're going to do this another day because there's just a lot to cover, and we're only at 1980, and we know that you opened up in 1989, but you're with the American Institute of Wine
and Food.
Yeah. And you're really rolling now, though, in Santa Monica. And
well, I mean, I think it was the important thing about Santa Monica was we were accomplishing so many new things. They referred to us as California cuisine, and I would explain to people that really what we were we just began. We pioneered regional American food. And as you know today, and like I said, when I did the James Beard dinner at the Stanford Court, Jim Nasikas was James Beard's oldest friend. And in San Francisco, I went to San Francisco every month for the board meetings because Jim would host them at the Stanford Court. And we would all meet there and we would go, the meetings were important, but it was where we were having lunch and where were we having dinner, which was almost as important. And we as part of getting the word out on the American Institute of Wine and Food, we had to do events, obviously, because we wanted to raise money. We wanted to show people what these young chefs were doing, what the new wineries were doing, what the progress that was being made, and all in the effort to create new American food. And so, for example, like those chefs I reeled off before, in 1983 is when we were doing the first James Beard event, and I reached out to those chefs, and each one of them represented a different area in America where they were pioneering their region's modern American food. Paul Prudhomme was transforming the old Creole recipes and making them modern. And that was his K-Pauls. Larry Forgione in New York, he was at the River Cafe at the time, and was opening, was really doing a bang up job of sourcing locally, getting the produce, getting the proteins, etc. Jimmy Schmidt in Detroit, he worked at the London Chop House, also another friend of James.
Bradley Ogden in Kansas City.
And Bradley Ogden in Kansas City, and Jeremiah, and
all region,
everybody up San Francisco. And so we put this dinner together,
Alice
and it was
Waters was part of this at that time.
Alice Waters, and I should send you the link one day to the movie because I filmed the whole thing.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
And then we edited it down, and it's a great movie that showcases individual pieces of each chef and each winemaker. Laura Chanel and her goat cheese paired with Bob Mondavi and his,
how long a film is this?
Well, it's about 30 minutes.
So we can go on the restaurant with my short film, Too Much Oregano, which won the Cannes Film Festival in 1980.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm going to show it to you.
Fantastic.
We're going to trade each other's creativity. Yours is far beyond mine, however. Now, wait a second. Am I being cued again? Is this 2 minutes? And that's it? 2 minutes to close? This is BS. For part one. Okay.
Part one.
Come on, Michael. We're just getting started. This is the appetizer, for Christ's sake.
Right.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry. All right. So 83, you're doing this.
83.
Love to see that film.
Yeah.
But I have a curiosity, and that is you're working down south in Southern California, and Alice Waters is working in Northern California.
Yes.
And you're almost on similar tracks, and you both are, quote, California cuisine.
Yeah.
Labeled as. So the pundits are calling it that. Were you in any way competitive with Alice?
No, not at all. In fact,
competitors?
She was a very big part of the American Institute of Wine and Food. That was the other thing. It was like chefs had always been rivals in the French wars. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They hated each other and they were rivals, and there's all kinds of stories.
Find out to each other.
We were bound and determined to do two things. Number one, have the American restaurateurs and chefs, be colleagues in this, be cohorts. The other thing, which as far as running the restaurant was, I insisted on breaking the age-old problem of the hatred between the front and the back of the house, which was always classic in horror. Everybody's in the restaurant business, but no, Alice, Jeremiah, Mark Miller in San Francisco. It was, they were, Mark was just beginning to do new Southwest American food. He pioneered the idea of using, it sounds ridiculous, but jalapenos and cilantro, with French olive oil and lime juice. And
I'm hungry.
On a grilled quail, you see, over mesquite. And, that's how beautiful it was in those days.
Right.
And Jeremiah, he like Larry Forgione did with his roast chicken, his free-range chicken. He basically coined the idea of calling it a free-range chicken. And when we did the dinner, the menu tells it all. The menu tells it all. When we, Bradley and Jimmy were doing, modern Midwest, using the traditions and the ingredients. Of course, now here we are. Flash forward to today. Every state in the union has its own modern American food, based on the traditions and the modernization of that. We were in Minneapolis last month. We ate in a restaurant run by a guy called the Sioux Chef, Sioux as an Indian, and he only uses pre-colonial ingredients. And it was a fantastic meal in Minneapolis. He's brilliant. And again, the revolution has succeeded and is televised.
Oh, I've got to get some of that North Dakota chili, I guess. I have no idea. Oh God, I'm overwhelmed with your knowledge, but I'm really very transfixed by the fact that you have created a life that is both culinary and entrepreneurial. You've got the business thing going. You've got the food thing going. You've got the art thing. A lot of those intersections, and you were part of a movement that everybody seemed to elevate everybody else to the higher standard. And you've set the bar very, very high. And you've been able to maintain it over these many years. I mean, the best restaurants in the world are not necessarily having this long run that you've had. Did you
Right.
ever run into a fallow period, a period that was really kind of like, I think I'm going to close it?
Well, let me tell you, I got a lot of stories about that. We should save all of that for the
That's
next.
for part two.
Yeah.
Okay, because we're going to leave on an up note for sure.
Yeah.
We're going to get into some of the disappointments in part two, but geez, this has been a really, really uplifting time, and just not enough. I don't have enough time to cover Michael McCarty. Is there anything that you would say to a 24-year-old aspiring person who wants to open his or her own restaurant, or they's own restaurant?
I would say that it is a fantastic career choice. It is very much more difficult than in the past, as everything is. What we go through in running restaurants is, it used to be all fun. It used to be about food and service and the decor and the people, and work has unfortunately creeped into it. The government regulations, the this, the that, the that, the this. It's not for the faint of heart. Now, in the old days, it wasn't for the faint of heart either, but that was because people looked at it as an emotional reason to go out and say, "I want to own a restaurant."
It was a creative thing to do.
Yeah, and it does take work, and it does take clarity. The good news is, if you are good at what you've got your concept down, and it is simplistic, you can win big, and you can have a great time doing it. The dynamic has changed drastically. We can do that for the next group.
But you have to stay focused.
Yeah, it is all about focus, and it's about knowing what you're capable of doing. And right now, there are so many role models to track. You can see the good, the bad, and the ugly in our business really right in front.
Well, I can tell you one thing that I marvel at, and that's you and Wolfgang Puck. You both are in your restaurants still. And that's what I think makes your restaurant so successful, because you have got the passion, and you're not just telling people about it. You're really exhibiting it.
Exactly. Well, that's the fun.
Piece of art.
That's the fun part.
Well, thank you for making my life fun today. I can't thank you enough for being part of Mr. Restaurant. This is Will Knox. I am with the real Mr. Restaurant. I've said it, but it's true. Michael McCarty. I'm signing off until we eat again.
Very good. Thank you.
We're clear.
Michael.
Yeah.
If it's okay with you, within the next month or